You're watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Here's your host, Don Ansell.
And welcome back to Byline Wilmington. I'm Rhonda Bellamy, substituting for Don Ansell, and speaking today with Dr. Stephen Meinhold, a local political scientist. We've been getting a look at the lay of the land for the 2011 municipal election scheduled for November 8th. One-stop voting runs October 20th through November 5th. We're also talking about 2012, and that's where we ended our discussion in the last segment. Let's talk about the pocketbook issues, because the economy affects everyone. Pocketbook issues going to dominate the discourse in 2012?
Yeah, absolutely. And depending on who you believe, certainly in political science, the economy always wins presidential elections. The economy, when it's doing well, helps an incumbent president. When the economy is doing poorly, it hurts an incumbent president. There is no question at all that at the end of the day, voters are thinking about the economy when they go to polls. Foreign policy rarely, if ever, is the driving force in presidential elections. And it's interesting because there are actually two different ideas about pocketbook voting. One is about macroeconomic voting, where a voter goes to the polls and thinks about the economy as a whole, the country's economy, and how the economy will either succeed or fail under a particular president's leadership. And then there is the more traditional thinking, microeconomic voting, or pocketbook voting as you called it, which is about a voter goes and looks at their own pocketbook or their own wallet and says, how am I doing and how am I likely to do? We have some friends up the road here in Chapel Hill who are big proponents of macroeconomic theory and really make a pretty convincing case that most voters don't look only at their own circumstances, economic circumstances, they look at the economic circumstances of the country. If that's the case, that probably hurts Obama even more leading into next year's election, because for many voters, they're actually doing okay because the stock market, if they have investments in the stock market, which is, is a small percentage, but those that do, the stock market is back. So the paradox of next year's election is that the average voter's doing poorly because the unemployment is high, new jobs are not being created fast enough for individuals, but yet there are some individuals who are doing okay. But if it's a macroeconomic theory, those folks see the challenges ahead. We keep having these debates about our federal deficit and our budget. We can't seem to get past the idea of how much money do we want to spend as a country, and that's depressing that macroeconomic theory.
Off mic, we talked a little earlier about another irony, and that is that in the primaries, you see people who are learned electorate, if you will. They really understand the issues in the primary. And then you have the infolding of others who are less involved in the political process. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Well, for the last 40 years, political science has been studying primary voters. And virtually all those studies support the position that primary voters are more knowledgeable about politics and candidates than general election voters. And so the irony or the paradox is that often the media portray the primaries as being driven by ideologues or by folks that have a very strong ideology who are likely to be who might not be knowledgeable about all the candidates because they're supporters of one candidate. That's actually not true when you look at the science. When you look at the research that's been done, they tend to know a lot about all the candidates. If you take a typical primary voter, they'll know something about all the presidential candidates who are running, and they'll have a reason why they've ranked the candidates the way they have. And the general rule of thumb is that these individuals who come in and participate in just one primary are a really small number of the overall primary voters.
Now let's talk about the role of the independents. They represent about 20% of the electorate?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, 20 to 30%. Depends when you head out west, the western part of the country, independent voter share increases. Both the Northeast, the Midwest, and the South tend to have a more partisan electorate. The independent voters will determine the election next fall in November. It will not be the partisan voters, in part because you'll have Republican voters who are the Tea Party identifiers who will stay home if Mitt Romney is the nominee. And you're going to have liberal Democrats who are going to stay home because they've been disillusioned with Obama, and who has not been able to satisfy the extreme left of the Democratic movement, just as Romney probably won't satisfy the extreme right. Take away those two sides, and what's left are the independent voters who will come to the turn out and come to the election in November, and they'll determine the outcome.
Any predictions as to which way they'll go?
Well, I think, let's look here at home in North Carolina. Independent voters will likely determine the outcome. And Obama has some challenges ahead of him. He's not popular right now. The economy is doing poorly. There's no sign that the economy is going to turn around. The battles in Washington about the budget have made both parties look bad, but they've made the president look bad too. He hasn't been able to rise above the political fray when it comes to solving the budget crisis. And I think furthermore, he'll want to look at foreign policy and try to claim some credit for Osama bin Laden, probably claim some credit for what's happened in the Middle East. He'll claim some credit if in what's true and happened in Libya with Gaddafi. So I think he's going to claim some credit for those. He'll say, well, I ended the Iraq war under my leadership. Afghan troops are coming down. But at the end of the day, we said before, pocketbook voting and the economy are going to drive this. The president has some challenges there. In North Carolina, if Romney is the nominee, he'll do pretty well. It'll be a swing state. Hard to make a prediction this early, but it certainly will be in play for Romney or Obama.
Again, if you're just tuning into Byline Wilmington, we are wrapping up our discussion this morning with Dr. Stephen Meinhold, a local political scientist. And just to go back to local elections for just a minute, same pocketbook issues driving the election?
Yeah, I think so. I think this will be a referendum on the way in which the mayor and incumbent city council members have handled the budget in Wilmington. There's always a lot of discussion about the sort of fringe issues. We have a concern right now over in downtown about how much of the windows in businesses can be covered by signs, but that won't drive very many voters. What's much more likely to drive voters are the issues around the utility authority, around taxes locally, and around balancing the city budget. Those issues are going to drive politics locally, just like they drive politics nationally.
Again, we are just wrapping up our discussion this morning with local political scientist Dr. Stephen Meinhold, getting a look at the lay of the land in advance of the November 8th general election. One-stop voting runs October 20th through November 5th, and of course, the 2012 election is in 2012. I'm Rhonda Bellamy, substituting for Don Ansell. Have a great day.
You've been watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Join us every Sunday morning as we explore the issues that concern you.